Buried in the Kuskokwim River Basin of southwestern Alaska sits one of the largest undeveloped gold reserves on Earth. We're looking at roughly 1,200 tons of metal. At current prices, that cash is valued at over $170 billion. You probably know the exact script for this kind of story. A massive, outside corporation zeroes in on untouched wilderness, threatening the ecosystem and the vulnerable indigenous communities who live there. But the proposed Donlin Gold Mine breaks that script. The native Alaskan people living in this region hold a very different role in the transaction. They are the actual corporate shareholders who stand to make billions of dollars from the extraction. This creates a profound paradox. The very people positioned to suffer the ecological fallout of a megamine are the exact same people legally positioned to build immense wealth from it. To understand how a community ends up in this position, we have to go back to 1971 and a piece of legislation called the Alaska Native Claims Settlement Act, or ANSA. This diagram outlines the mechanism at play. The law transferred land and resource rights back to Native Alaskans, but with a specific condition. They had to organize themselves into for-profit corporations, converting those ancestral rights into individual corporate shares. Practically overnight, an entire population of hunter-gatherers and traditional fishers were legally reclassified as profit-seeking executives and stockholders. This conflict isn't a moral failing of the local population. It's a tension engineered by a U.S. law that fundamentally pits their financial duty as shareholders against their own ecological survival. In Western Alaska, hauling a net or hunting for game is not a hobby. It is an absolute requirement for biological and cultural survival. This chart shows the raw data of that survival. The annual wild harvest here exceeds 172 kilograms of food per person, roughly 3 times the amount of meat and seafood consumed by the average citizen in Japan. You can see the industrial scale of this traditional food system. To these communities, salmon and moose carry the same fundamental importance as rice does across East Asia. To lose this land is to lose the central pillar of their civilization. The environment is the economy. To extract that gold, the project requires a fleet of barges. That heavy industrial traffic runs directly through fragile salmon spawning routes. Then there is the chemical risk. Separating gold from rock on this scale requires cyanide leaching. That process leaves behind toxic waste that must be stored behind enormous tailings dams, structures that have a track record of catastrophic failures. The mechanics of the mine introduce a permanent, existential fragility to an ecosystem that is currently self-sustaining. But the perception of that threat isn't uniform. It changes drastically depending on geography. For shareholders living in the city of Anchorage, daily hunting is a distant reality. For them, the priority is often the corporate dividends and the job creation a $170 billion project promises. Contrast that with the downriver Yupik communities. Their primary fear is water pollution destroying the salmon. Meanwhile, the upriver northern Dene are focused on a different map, fearing the destruction of the land-based ecology. These conflicting identities, the profit-seeking shareholder, the traditional hunter, the worried parent, often exist simultaneously inside the mind of a single person. The most intense battleground isn't between neighboring towns, but within the psychology of individuals forced to choose between 2 competing versions of their own future. Outside observers often want to categorize the native response as a simple yes or no, but that binary fails to capture the complexity of the situation. As the global scramble for resources intensifies, more indigenous communities will find their ancestral lands caught in these exact corporate legal structures. Traditional frameworks of sustainable development fail here because they don't account for the contradictory roles these populations are legally forced to play. True sustainability must recognize that economic sovereignty and environmental preservation are sometimes locked in a painful negotiation, one led by the very people who have the most to lose.